Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made his first official visit to Poland since the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The leader of the embattled country was welcomed by Polish President Andrzej Duda, who awarded him with Poland's highest order, the White Eagle.
It's a great honor for me to be here today with my wife and to thank the President, his team, the Polish government and every Pole for what you have already done. You have not abandoned Ukraine, you have stood shoulder to shoulder with us, and we are grateful for it. I believe that these are historic relations, a historic result and a historic strength between our countries.
Poland has been Ukraine's closest ally since the very beginning of the war and has provided the war-torn country with vast military backing. In the most recent round of aid, Ukraine received 4 MiG-29 fighter jets, with an additional 10 to come, according to the Polish president. Zelensky later met with Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki and signed agreements concerning the purchase of Polish weapons, rebuilding the war-torn country, and the cooperation between 2 Polish and Ukrainian strategic companies. The Ukrainian leader also took the opportunity to meet with some of the 1.5 million refugees currently registered in Poland.
It's certainly been quite a visit to Warsaw by President Zelensky today. Military, economic and historical issues have been discussed. Now with me I have Bohdan Nahaylo from the Kyiv Post, the chief editor, and Tomasz Pawłuszko from the University of Opole and the Sobieski Institute, and we'll be discussing some of the broader and more detailed issues involved. Welcome to the programme, gentlemen. Before we start, well, let's take an overview of the visit and play a couple of statements that both the presidents made today.
I speak to you with gratitude and strength. I speak to you with gratitude because we have been together. Ukrainian and Polish hearts live for shared freedom, shared independence, shared Europe, and we will prevail. We together, Poles and Ukrainians, can build and write our victorious history, arm in arm, hand in hand, and I'm grateful for this to all Poles. I bow to you. Ukraine has shown to the whole world that it was able to stand against an empire, a country so much greater and theoretically so much more powerful than they were. Putin failed to achieve all of his strategic goals. Russia keeps suffering great losses, which is a great success of the Ukrainian state, the Ukrainian society, and the Ukrainian armed forces. But to finish, to put an end to this war, well, there is still a way to go. Ukraine still needs support.
Okay, Bohdan Nahaylo, what do you make of President Zelensky's visit to Warsaw today and its impact?
It's a continuation of what we've had. It's a reaffirmation of this very strong bond that has developed between Poland and Ukraine, and I would say the emerging new axis in Central and Eastern Europe based on the Polish-Ukrainian relationship, in which the Balts, the Romanians, the Czechs, hopefully eventually even the Belarusians will be taking part in. It's part of the new reconfiguration of Europe, which is doing justice to Europe after decades of communist, read Russian or imperialist as well, yes, rule. So I think historically it's, shall we say, a reaffirmation of the trend in which things have been going, accelerated by Russian aggression, the latest mass assault on Ukraine in February 2022. A historic moment, but not a surprise, consistency and movement forward.
Tomasz Pawłuszko, do you have a similar evaluation of this? I mean, both the presidents showed a deep historical consciousness, didn't they? Tomasz Pawłowski?
Well, definitely, I couldn't agree more. When I was watching these events, I was thinking about the book from 1997 written by Zbigniew Brzeziński, and the book was called The Grand Chessboard. And Brzeziński wrote at that time that the Poland, Ukraine, can create a new security architecture in the Eastern Europe. So we are observing some kind of a show of the new Eastern Europe. Memorandum, of course, is the first step. It could be compared to the similar agreements between France and Germany after the Second World War. So the historical dimension is very, very important, especially in the Eastern Europe. But in Brzeziński's vision, there were four countries: Poland, Ukraine, France, and Germany understood together as an arc of European security. I think that the Polish as well as the Ukrainian leaders understand the credibility and the importance of the situation. I think that also Washington understands what's going on, but I really have doubts if our German and French partners understand what's going on actually in the security architecture of Eastern Europe.
Yes, I mean, I'll ask Bohdan Nahaylo. In the main news, you seem to allude that the centre of gravity, well, you didn't allude, you suggested the centre of gravity of Europe has drifted east. Does this mean that Germany and France, two former players in the security architecture, they have lost influence, or are they just being eclipsed by the new realities?
I don't think they're being eclipsed. I think there's a new balance of weightings in Europe. Let's not forget Britain. Britain has left the EU after Brexit, as a result of Brexit, but it's a formidable player now with a more autonomous foreign policy, though it's, a key member of NATO and a key supporter of Ukraine and Poland. So what we are seeing is that, as opposed to the influence being concentrated in Berlin, Paris, Brussels, but dominated essentially by Berlin, we're seeing, a more multipolar Europe with the right sort of balance, with Eastern and Central Europe speaking on its own behalf. It may not have the economic clout of Germany, for example, but it has the moral clout. They are the ones in Eastern Europe and in Central Europe, and those who are behind the Iron Curtain further east, like the Ukrainians, who stood up for human rights, for national self-determination. After Yalta, when Poland was written off, even by great Democrats like Churchill and Roosevelt, and given to Stalin, now the voices of these peoples have been heard in the proper way, and a real proper understanding of Europe is occurring. And I do believe that Berlin and Paris have woken up to this fact. However reluctantly, however slow, they are realizing that Europe is being reconfigured along new lines, more akin to the civilizational values that Europe represents.
But Tomasz Pawłowski, is having the moral weight in Europe enough? I mean, Germany is still the economic superpower, and its influence surely will still be very significant. I mean, does Eastern Europe have the potential to translate its moral power into economic power, to get things done?
Well, I think there is a really symbolic advantage in these events because, Polish people as well as Ukrainian people know what does Russification means and what does it mean to be not free, what does it mean to be occupied? What does it mean to be defeated?
Yes.
What does it mean to be on the wrong side, right? For the last 300 years, the Eastern Europe was dominated by the Russian imperialism, and now we are watching the Russification of Russian influences in this part of the continent. I think that this is a historical event, and it creates some kind of moral advantage also for the nations that were fighting for freedom for such a long time. They really care about freedom, and we can watch it every day in the news, watching Ukrainian heroes, Ukrainian fighters, Ukrainian soldiers, but also normal people, everyday guys, watching, helping the others, and doing this for freedom, for their families, for their country. That's really inspiring, and I think that Polish people really understand what's going on in Ukraine at the moment. I'm not really sure if the Western societies are aware of this. Maybe they do not have a chance. Maybe they didn't have a historical experience similar to ours. But still, history still remains important in this part of Europe. And this tradition, this heritage may be used for building better economic relations.
Bohdan, Nahaylo, you wanted to come in on that point.
Yes, I think we are seeing a change in the mindset of Western Europeans. Look, I was born in Britain of Ukrainian origin. At school, we were not taught about Poland. We were not taught about Byzantium, 1,000 years of Byzantine history. Or any other country in the East. We were taught about France and Spain and England and the Tudors and the Wars of the Roses. We were not taught about the Mongol invasions and Sovietsky at Vienna or whatever. So late in the day, and remember in 1938 in Munich, when Chamberlain went there with the French and made their deal with Hitler, Chamberlain came back, and not only did he say peace in our time, but he said, you know, Czechoslovakia is a far-off country of which we know little. I think that this terrible war that Russia has unleashed on Ukraine, but it's effrontery vis-a-vis the civilized democratic world, Poland in particular, apart from Ukraine, it has woken up people in the West and in America too, Australia, whatever, in Japan, and it has made people think about what is the world about? What are the values? We have become very lackadaisical, very sort of complacent about values that once upon a time, solidarity, Charter 77 in Czechoslovakia, in Ukraine, the dissidents represented. Now there is this fight going on, and I think that it has certainly dawned on the British, and increasingly at a slower pace on the French and the Germans and the others, that Europe is not just about themselves. Europe is about a broader family, that united we stand, divided we fall.
Coming over to the to what the two presidents said, they're two very eloquent and powerful speeches, and they both They both referenced the historical reconciliation. Is that in progress? Has it been started? Is it possible to reconcile or have an understanding between historians as to the historical interpretations of Polish and Ukrainian recent history? Tomasz Pawłowski.
Well, let me go first then.
Okay, right. Okay.
Let me go first. Look, for decades now, the Poles and the Ukrainians have had historical commissions. We've set an example. There's been nothing similar between the Russians and the Ukrainians.
Yes, of course.
With the Poles and the Ukrainians, despite their differences over Western Ukraine, Lviv, Volhynia, all the tricky, difficult, painful elements in history, and the 200 or 300, 400 years that came before that, you know, we have managed to find that dialogue, and we have managed to overcome those difficulties, and we have managed to embrace each other and say that, as I just said, that united we are much stronger, and it makes sense for us not to dwell on the historical difficulties, problems, crimes, atrocities that occurred in the past, but to dwell on our common future, on our common predicament, the challenges that face us, and to build a common way forward. And I think that the Ukrainians have matured as well. I think the Poles, after Solidarity and after people like Giedroyc and the journal Kultura, they paved the way. But in Ukraine today, there is this realization, certainly in the last 10 years and increasingly in the last 2 or 3 years, that Poles are our closest neighbor, brothers, and that history has not just been a source of division. There was so much that united us too.
There are very significant, powerful, symbolic actions today. Tomasz Pawłuszko, the Polish President Vladimir Zelensky, was awarded the Order of the White Eagle, very ancient 18th century order. He visited the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, which again had references to conflicts between Polish forces and Ukrainian forces. How would you judge the impact, the likely impact of these two hugely symbolic actions today, both in Poland and perhaps in the Ukraine?
Well, symbols are very important at the moment, but we are writing a new chapter in history. There is a past, there is a present day, and there is a future. And I'm really glad that all three elements were active during this visit of President Zelensky. It was very important also for Polish ruling party, which really is focused on historical matters and historical policies, and to giving Polish people some stories about the good past and the rebuilding of the good memories from the past. I think it really helps us to do more in the field of historical memory. I have Ukrainian students, I have Polish students, and they cooperate together. They live in present, yes, but still we will have a people and we will have a cooperation in the future. And we have to be ready for that, building on some kind of solid fundamentals. I think that visits like this and speeches like we've heard today are very important, and they really help us in being more and more together in these difficult times.
Both of the presidents appealed to a rather uncompromising view of what constitutes victory in Ukraine. How do you think that'll be achieved without, for example, a jaded USA calling for a negotiated settlement, or China pressurizing Russia to negotiate a settlement? How do you see that, Bohdan Nahaylo?
Well, the mood in Kyiv, I must say, is one of not compromising. We've given up too much, we've sacrificed too much, and we've learned too much from history. We know that if we settle for some kind of freezing of the conflict, even for 2 or 3 years, Russia will not change its spots. It will be its imperialistic self after it recovers, and therefore we need victory. And we need victory which comes not only with what is very important, the security architecture that will help us, which ultimately means NATO, but in the interim may mean something else, short of NATO membership. But we also need justice. We need the Russians to face up to their past. They didn't go through a process of denazification like the Germans did. They need to know not only about Stalin and the Gulag, they need to know the crimes that they have been committing today, you know, in this present decade year, which already the international criminal courts are condemning. So that's one thing. And then there's the whole question of reparations. Look, it's not fair for Europe or the EU or the Americans to foot the bill, or the Poles. I mean, the Russians should pay for the damage and the destruction that they have brought. So victory cannot be just simply, okay, we stop shooting at one another, and you occupy 20 or 10% of our territory, we reach a deal on Crimea. There's the other issues. There are the issues of justice, reparations, and most importantly, security, so that we can be safe as Europe, as neighbors, you and us and Belarus and the others in the years to come.
A final brief question to Tomasz Pawłuszko. How does this fit into Polish calls for Ukraine to be accepted into NATO and the EU, and Ukrainian demands to join EU and NATO? How do you see that developing, given the fact that there's either a complete war there or a frozen conflict? How do you see that?
Well, I think that we need at least 10 years in order to create a specific roadmap for Ukraine in the EU as well as in the NATO, because it's still possible, I think. Everything is based on the result, on the final result of the war. We really hope that the Ukrainian soldiers have many advantages and they are fighting for their freedom. So they are not only they not only have negative motivation to kill Russians, but they also have positive motivation to create something new to defend their country. And I think that this attitude will be really helpful and will create some kind of moral advantage also during any negotiations with the Western partners. And I really hope that the European Commission, as well as the NATO group, will be able to discuss the future of Ukrainian membership. NATO has a summit in Vilnius this year, this summer, and negotiations with Ukraine within the EU have already started. Well, so I think that this decade is crucial.
Well, we have to draw this to a conclusion, unfortunately. We could go on, but Bohdan, Nahaylo, Tomasz Pawłuszko, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Dziękuję bardzo.
Proszę bardzo. My name is Jan Darasz. You've been watching TVP World Today. There's plenty more to come, so keep watching us.